welcome. You're watching India Today Explains. I'm Akshata Nandagopal, and over the next half hour, I'll break down the biggest stories of the week. Coming up on the show, we focus on the aftermath of the Delhi Red Fort blast as investigations revealed that there was a deadly plot to use a toxin called ricin in fruits and vegetables. We tell you with the help of AI what this toxin is and how it's simply impossible to detect. Also, details have emerged that the bomber Umar used a TATP explosive in the I-20, and that's what went off right outside Red Fort. Why is this explosive called the mother of Satan? We'll explain. Also on the show, the crackdown on Naxalism, with two top Naxal commanders being eliminated. We take a look back at how this threat grew in several parts of India over the last many decades. We'll also talk about what's happening in Bangladesh and why Sheikh Hasina has been sentenced to death. And finally on the show, the viral Himachali festival that's got everyone talking. We tell you the story behind this beautiful tradition. So lots lined up. Let's get started. What if the next terror attack doesn't come with a blast, but spreads silently through the water you drink? It's not fiction. This is a real threat. A group busted by Gujarat ATS was allegedly plotting to use ricin. It's a lethal chemical toxin to contaminate public water and cause mass poisoning. This is what experts call as biochemical warfare. Biochemical warfare means using biological or chemical agents like viruses, bacteria or toxins to kill or incapacitate humans, animals or crops. It's not about explosions, it's about invisible death spread through air, water or food. Ricin falls in the chemical toxin category, a poison that attacks your cell from within. And here's how it works. Ricin is extracted from the castor bean plant, the same plant used to make everyday castor oil. But once the oil is removed, the leftover seed mash can be turned into a deadly poison. Just a few milligrams, barely the size of a pinhead, can block your body's ability to make proteins. Organs start to fail, death follows within hours, and there's no antidote. According to the ATS, the suspects had links to ISIS Khorasan and were allegedly receiving instructions from Abu Khadija, a handler in Afghanistan. Weapons, including imported pistols and cartridges, were recovered. A doctor trained in science using that knowledge to weaponize a household plant. That's what makes this case even more chilling. It's been used before too. In 2013, America witnessed one of its most alarming bio-threats. Several ricin-laced letters were discovered, one even addressed to President Barack Obama. Investigations revealed that a woman named Shannon Richardson had mailed those poison letters to the president. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison, while another man, James Dushé, was also convicted in a separate ricin case. It showed how a simple envelope could trigger national panic. No bomb, no gun, just a few grains of deadly toxin. And in 2020, a woman from Canada mailed an actual ricin poison letter to the White House. The FBI intercepted it in time. She was later sentenced to more than 20 years in jail. Investigators say the suspects had surveyed Ahmedabad's fruit market and Delhi's Azadpur Mandi as part of an alleged plot involving ricin. The toxin can cause vomiting, diarrhea and several breathing issues, often before doctors can diagnose it. And because ricin is tasteless and odorless, detecting it in everyday settings is extremely difficult. The Gujarat ATS, working with central agencies, seized chemicals, castor oil and imported weapons. Digital evidence is now being analyzed to see how far the ricin extraction had progressed. From guns to gases and now to toxins and microbes. Because biochemical warfare doesn't need an army, just knowledge, access and intent. The most dangerous weapon may not explode, it may simply spread. And for every citizen, vigilance is the antidote we do have. In the course of the Delhi blast's investigation, it's emerged that the suicide bomber Umar used an explosive called TATP. triacetone triperoxide, also referred to as the mother of Satan. It's a white crystalline powder, also called acetone, and has a distinct bleach-like odor when impure or a fruit-like smell when pure. This explosive has long held a chilling reputation in global counter-terror organizations because it's considered one of the most volatile and dangerous substances linked to organized terror modules and lone wolf attacks. The mother of Satan has been infamous for its use in the 2005 bombings in London, in which over 50 people died, the 2015 Paris attacks, the 2016 bombings in Brussels, the 2017 bombing in Manchester Arena, and the 2019 Easter bombings in Sri Lanka, going on to show that this is used frequently. This explosive's volatility is its most alarming feature. Mild heat, friction, or even static electricity, all of that can trigger a violent reaction. And so, because of its unpredictable nature, experts often describe it as an accident waiting to happen. This instability makes it hazardous not only during an attack, but even while being moved or stored, which is what we also witnessed in Nogam when the storage area witnessed a massive explosion. Military forces generally avoid relying on TATP because of this high volatility and instead use more predictable and powerful explosives. What makes it worse is that TATP is easily available. One of the biggest concerns for global agencies is that the chemicals linked to TATP have common industrial and even household use. Think hair bleach or nail polish remover. They actually contain chemicals used to make TATP. And it's been used several times by lone wolf operatives for suicide missions, by sleeper cell modules, and essentially plots that rely on concealment and speed. And add to that, the challenge for forensic teams is that it breaks down rapidly. What that means is that it leaves very little chemical residue. So unlike conventional explosives like TNT, the mother of Satan doesn't contain nitrogen, making it difficult to track using outdated detection scanners. So investigators, therefore, are forced to rely on device fragments, on vehicle parts, footwear or clothing for any proof of TATP being used. Even in the Redford blast, traces detected on the tire, the shoe and the blast site have become crucial leads. Add to all of these challenges, TATP creates large-scale damage. It isn't a small explosive, as we witnessed in the Redford blast. It produces a massive, powerful explosion. Officials say TATP can deliver up to 80% of TNT's explosive power, and this despite the fact that it's made from easily available chemicals. There's been a huge breakthrough in the fight against Red Terror this week, with a top Naxal commander, Madhvi Hidma, being eliminated, taking us one step closer to a Naxal Mukt Bharat. Shah has promised that under the Modi government, Naxalism will be wiped out by 2026. So let's decode for you how Naxalism took roots in India and decades on still remains a threat to our forces. Naxalism is a movement by left extremist groups. They've often been called Maoists too because they support Maoist ideology. It's a doctrine essentially developed by Mao Zedong to capture power from governments through armed insurgencies. So how did this movement actually seep into India? Let's go back to 1967, where Naxalism first took roots in the state of Bengal. The Naxal Bari uprising was led by peasants who revolted against landowners. That's where Naxalism also, by the way, got its name from, courtesy the village where the first revolt took place. The Naxal Bari movement was backed by a group called the Siliguri Group. It's a faction of the CPIM. CPIM then was Communist Party of India Marxist. Leaders like Charu Majumdar, Kanu Sanyal and Jungle Santal vowed their support to these villagers and said that they were even willing to resort to an armed struggle to ensure land was redistributed to the landless. 11 people died in that struggle, including a police officer. But this was just the beginning. In 1969, the CPI-ML, which is Marxist-Leninist, was formed by the Siliguri group because of a rebellion within the party. And the movement started gaining ground beyond Bengal as well. Youngsters particularly were very taken by the movement. In terms like class enemies, annihilation line became the theme of the movement. What that meant is to assassinate those who belonged to powerful positions. It was in 1980 that Naxalism spread like wildfire in Andhra Pradesh, particularly along the Andhra-Odisha border. After Naxals abducted landlords, killed police officials, the government cracked the whip, setting up a special force called the Greyhounds and thereby dented the extremist movement. Now, the next important date to remember in the Naxal movement is September 2004. This was when the CPI Maoist was founded through the merger of two Naxal groups. And after this, the 2000s unfortunately saw a bloodied conflict in many parts of the country. Between 2004 to 2023, 8,803 people have been killed in different parts of India because of Naxalism. According to the Home Ministry, majority of the civilians killed are tribals, often branded as police informers before being brutally tortured and killed by Naxalites. That's why the UPA government in 2009 banned the CPI Maoist under the UAPA, declaring it as a terrorist organization. Let's now talk about the worst affected states by Naxalism. Now, the influence zone of the Naxalites is called the Red Corridor, which spanned nearly 25 districts. Mind you, that number has drastically reduced today. But in the peak of the Naxal movement, it was Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Bihar, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and even Kerala. Now, the Red Corridor is usually some of the poorer districts with a high tribal population, and development, importantly, in these parts have been met with violence and complete resistance. Now, let's also talk and tell you about some of the worst Naxal attacks that India has witnessed. The most recent bloodied one was in April 2023 when 10 security personnel, while returning from a counter-insurgency operation along with the driver, were killed when the vehicle they were travelling in was blown up by Naxals. This happened in Chhattisgarh's Dantewada. And then there was April 2021, where 22 security forces were killed by Naxals, again in Chhattisgarh, but this time in Sukma district. But the worst attack on our forces by Naxals was in 2010, when 300 Naxals attacked a CRPF convoy when they were returning after an operation, leading to 76 CRPF personnel losing their lives. It's important to also highlight here that the deaths in the last few years due to Naxals have come down. More and more Naxals now are surrendering their arms before the government. How is the government ensuring this? Let's now get you the details of how the government is tackling the Naxal threat. The Modi government under Home Minister Amit Shah has vowed to end Naxalism by March 2026. That's the deadline they've set for themselves, and they're planning to do so by establishing rule of laws in Naxal affected areas. That's basically first, stop illegal activities, and second, to ensure the development in those areas that were deprived of the same by Naxals, to ensure minimal support to the extremists. But the biggest step that's also in fact been a game changer is incentivizing those Naxals who surrender. So here's what the government scheme is. Naxals who surrender get trained in a trade of their choice so they can go ahead and secure a job. They're also given a monthly stipend of 2,000 rupees for 36 months so that they can find a job, until then continue to fend for themselves. Not just that, 1.5 lakh rupees is also given as an immediate grant. And if they surrender with weapons, then that amount actually increases based on which weapon they've handed over to the forces. And so, in a state like Chhattisgarh, for example, since January 2024, over 723 Naxals have surrendered and given up arms. In 2024, Bangladesh witnessed one of the biggest political upheavals in its history. Former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina forced out of power after massive student-led protests spiraled onto national unrest. She fled to India, ending her uninterrupted rule since 2009. And then this week, that crisis deepened further when a special tribunal in Dhaka sentenced her to death in absentia for crimes against humanity linked to last year's student uprising. The verdict triggered emotional reactions in Bangladesh, families of victims cheering inside the courtroom. To understand the current crisis, it's important to examine Bangladesh's turbulent history. From 1947 to 1971, Bangladesh existed as East Pakistan, separated from West Pakistan by 1,600 kilometers. And then it had faced deep political and economic discrimination, eventually leading to the 1971 Liberation War, in which India, of course, played a major role by supporting refugees and the Mukti Bahini. Bangladesh became independent on December 16, 1971, when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, as its first Prime Minister, was chosen. After his assassination in 1975, years later, the country saw years of coups and instability. Then Mujib's daughter, Sheikh Hasina, stepped in. She returned from exile in 1981 and took charge of the Awami League. Over the years, she became central to Bangladesh's democratic struggle. She first became Prime Minister in 1996 and again in 2009, after which she stayed in power for 15 years. Her tenure brought major economic growth, stronger ties with India, of course, but it also drew a whole lot of criticism for authoritarian tendencies, for attacks on opposition parties and shrinking democratic space. But let's talk about the present crisis. It was triggered by large-scale student protests against job quotas that favored descendants of freedom fighters. Students demanded a fair, merit-based recruitment system. The situation escalated after a police crackdown and Sheikh Hasina's remark calling these protesters as Razakars, a term historically used for traitors. And this happened at the backdrop of the heavily disputed 2024 elections, which the opposition had boycotted. There were all of these reports suggesting that it was rigged. This worsened public distrust. There was rising unemployment, inflation, corruption, general frustration among the youth, which added more fuel to the unrest. The crisis peaked when protesters stormed Hasina's residence, leading to her dramatic exit and flight to India. So why has she now been sentenced to death? Well, a special tribunal has found Hasina guilty on several counts, including ordering killings of the student protesters, authorizing lethal force through drones and helicopters, and failing to stop atrocities during the 2024 protests. She received 2 death sentences and a life term. Former Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan also received a death sentence. Hasina has called the trial unfair, manipulated, saying she can still challenge the verdict in a higher court. But what about India? Bangladesh has formally asked India to extradite Sheikh Hasina and Asaduzzaman Khan. India and Bangladesh do have an extradition treaty. It was signed in 2013 that allows both countries to hand over individuals wanted for crimes punishable by at least 1 year in prison. So that box is ticked in this particular case. But the treaty also includes key exceptions, especially for offences considered political in nature. And that particular caveat is what matters. India can refuse extradition if it believes the charges are not made in good faith or if handing over the person would be unjust. Because of these clauses, India is not automatically bound to extradite Sheikh Hasina despite Bangladesh's request. I'm sure you've all seen the viral pictures of men and women dressed in local Himachali attire, beautiful colors, in a mountain festival that's got the world talking. So let's tell you all about this tradition and break down for you all of the images you've been seeing, what it means. In the remote highlands of Himachal Pradesh, in villages like Kalpa and its surrounding hamlets, lies a ritual so old that it literally seems to breathe on its own. Raulani is not just a festival, it's a living echo, a cultural heartbeat that's pulsed through the mountains for thousands of years. Celebrated at the turning of seasons, when winter essentially is loosening its grips and the meadows return to life, Raulani brings entire communities together to honor forces that are older than their memory, older than even their temples. Raulani is believed to be around 5,000 years old, or maybe more than that, older than most organized religions, older than written Indian culture, older than the political idea of India itself. And one of the most striking mysteries of this festival is that it has no definitive beginning. Unlike most of our festivals rooted in scriptures, epics or myths, Raulani exists without a founding story or a written reference. The belief mostly woven into its origin is that it's connected to the Sauni mystical mountain fairies, which are guardian spirits of Kinnaur's meadows. These beings are not feared, but they're actually revered because villagers there describe them as gentle presence made of winter mist and moonlit air. They say that they guide travelers, they protect livestock, and they ease the harshness of long winters. So they believe they're protected by these mountain fairies. So Raulani likely began as a simple offering of gratitude, flowers, milk, handmade ornaments placed quietly to keep the valley alive. Over generations, this humble gesture evolved into the elaborate ritual that we see today. And at the heart of this festival is a pairing that appears like a marriage, but it's far more symbolic. The Raula, the enlightened man, and the Raulani, the bride, which is also played by a man, by the way, represent the merging of masculine and feminine energies of human devotion and cosmic guidance. Chosen from each neighborhood cluster, from villages, they transform on the festival morning through layers of ancestral clothing, masks and flower crowns. And their faces are completely hidden for this ritual because they say it cannot be performed by ordinary humans, only by beings who represent the bridge between worlds. So during the festival, there'll be drums, chants, shawls, temple bells as the festival unfolds. And so you have the Raula and the Raulani leading the village towards the Nagin Narayan temple. There are fierce, masked figures who walk ahead, protecting the procession from unseen forces. To locals, this is the mountain walking again through them. And then you have the Raula and the Raulani performing a slow trance-like dance, a language of gestures. And this dance marks the moment when villagers believe the veil between human and mystic realms actually thins. It's here that the fairies are gently sent back to the meadows that they guard, carrying prayers for protection, for healthy harvests and harmony. Raulani, to many, is older than history, but it survives even though the world that created it no longer exists. That's all we have time for in this edition of India Today Explains. Thanks very much for tuning in. I'll see you same time next week.